If you've been listening along for a while, you'll know I'm all about staying sharp physically and mentally. As I get older, staying on top of my game means being smarter with how I support my body and mind day in, day out. One product I've already added to my routine from the bulk nutrients range is their NMN Extend. It's a science-backed blend of 10 powerful ingredients, including NMN, resveratrol, and hyaluronic acid. Now, this is designed to support everything from energy and muscle recovery to skin hydration, joint health, and even mental clarity. And by the way, I need all those. Whether I'm powering through a busy week or just investing in my long-term health, NMN Extend help me stay ready for whatever's next. And believe me, it tastes pretty good too. Head to bulknutrients.com.au and see why NMN Extend might be the edge you just been looking for. Dr. Lila Landowski, welcome to Project 100.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you come up from Tasmania today.
Yes, the deep dark south.
The deep dark, I love it down there. And you're a neuroscientist. You're a lecturer at University of Tasmania. You're the VP of Science and Technology Australia. Maybe you can tell the audience just a little bit more about yourself other than what I've just covered off. So, what's a neuroscientist do, for example?
Oh, look, I'm a lover of science and a lover especially of the brain. So I kind of never actually planned to do neuroscience, but I always wanted to work in, therapeutic development for illnesses, right? And I ended up in neuroscience basically after sitting in a lecture with a neuroscientist who was doing really interesting stuff. And I was really intrigued by that research and I had some ideas about how we could take it forward. So that's kind of how I ended up in research, or at least in neuroscience, but research was always my dream and my goal. And as a neuroscientist, it's an incredible blessing to be able to spend your day thinking of questions and figuring out how to answer them. So that's kind of what I get to do on a daily basis.
It's like just brain science or neuroscience. I guess that's the better word is neuroscience. But brain science is sort of like, for me, like there's outer space. That's, going to the stars or Mars where we've got aspirations to go to. But there's also inner space. And I think they're both totally unexplored.
Yeah.
And so fascinating.
It is. It is the great frontier, I think. We talk about, up in space being the great frontier, but actually it's in here.
Yeah. And I don't know why we spend so much money going up that way when we could be doing a lot more down this way. And what are you researching now? What's some of your research topics you're looking at?
So right now I'm spending less time in the lab. But things that I have worked on in the past is nerve regeneration. So finding ways to get nerves to grow back. And in my doctorate, I discovered a natural protein that could regenerate nerves in the skin. I've also worked in stroke, in dementia, and also using nanotechnology to try and help outcomes in stroke as well. And
for a neuroscientist, you mentioned nerves. Nerves are part of the brain.
Yes.
Yeah. So just so it'd be clear for our listeners, I mean, the nervous system is all attached to the brain somehow, I guess. Is that correct? I mean, you're as interested in the nervous system as you are about what's going on inside our head.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the nervous system part of it is in our brain, but it spans out throughout our body and it's providing instructions for our body parts, telling those body parts what to do, but it's also taking information from our body parts and taking that information to the brain so it knows how good those instructions were. And, that's how we're able to balance on a tightrope, for example. We're getting instructions to our legs about our balance and making sure that we balance, but also getting input from our body about how good we are at doing that, and we can adjust our balance accordingly. So really, it's this whole beautiful dynamic system that works together in synchrony. And it's really, really incredible the amount of computations that our brain is doing. So if our brain was a computer, it would be doing about 1 billion calculations per second.
Whoa.
And you'd need about 1 million laptops to do that.
Whoa.
Our brain is doing that on the power of a light bulb.
Wow. And so you're talking about the electrical system in our brain is equivalent to the power of one light bulb.
That's it. So imagine if we could, somehow harness that efficiency with our computers. It would be incredible, but we're not there yet.
One day. Quantum.
Yes.
So, talking about the brain and talking about the nervous system, and longevity, which is sort of what Project 100 is all about, I'm really interested to talk to you about longevity relative to those things that will affect our longevity that actually can emanate from the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And one that's really intriguing to me is the whole concept of stress.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend of mine many years ago who was he was a liver specialist and a gastroenterologist, and an older guy, and he's now passed away. But in the 90s, he told me, because I was actually interested, I was very stressed out at work, etc., and I had a high stress job, and I always thought to myself, stress makes you sick. I don't know why I thought that, but I just thought it could do that. And I asked him one day, because he was my next door neighbour, I asked him one day, I said, can stress cause ulcers? And he said to me, he then went on through this process to explain how some Australians won a Nobel Prize for science for discovering that stomach ulcers are caused by a thing called Helicobacter pylori, and that they'd also discovered a way of curing that, a certain antibiotic. And he said, so stress doesn't affect us. It doesn't have a physical outcome. I never sort of believed him. It just didn't make sense to me. Maybe it doesn't give you stomach ulcers, but where does stress fit into, and our ability to control stress fit into our longevity game? Because that's the new game now, longevity.
Oh, truly. And it is inextricably linked. And our understanding is just completely evolving now. I think if we maybe take it back a step and talk about what stress is actually doing in the body. So fundamentally, stress is there to help us survive. It's there to help us reach peak performance. When we're stressed, whether it's being stuck in traffic or having an argument or trying to complete a task, we're releasing all of these neurochemicals that are essentially preparing us to meet that challenge. It's going to be diverting blood from non-essential things like our
digestion.
Yes, digestion, taking it away from digestion, taking it away from your skin. So you can imagine if it's taking it away from those things, your skin will age faster. Your gut you might experience irritable bowel kind of symptoms as a result of that. So that's one thing. But it's taking energy to the organs and the brain structures that are going to help you thrive in that situation. So your airways will dilate. Signals will be sent to your muscles to make, the blood vessels in your muscles dilate, so more blood flow gets to there, so that way you can escape a situation. You'll get more blood flow to certain regions in the brain as well. So really, all of this beautifully linked pathway is there to help us thrive. But also there's a spin-off as well. So it will help you in the short term, but if you're constantly experiencing stress in the long term, well, there are going to be consequences to reduce blood flow to the gut and to the skin. You'll get wrinkles, your hair might fall out, and you might have those symptoms in your bowel and your gut, as I spoke about as well.
Can it cause things like, or is there any correlation or any studies that indicate correlation perhaps as opposed to causation? Things like strokes or other brain disorders?
So we do know that you have an increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases, and basically it causes your cells across your entire body to age faster. So it affects every cell in your body right down to the level of your genes.
Is it through, as in oxidation? Is it oxidative stress? What are we talking about?
No, our stress hormone cortisol literally will go into cells and affect even the nucleus of a cell.
Wow.
So it's a very powerful modulator of how our body functions. Now, when we think about stress, we often think about things like adrenaline, and that affects your body in the short term for a couple of minutes. It has a very short half-life, so it doesn't stay in your body for a long time. But cortisol hangs around for a couple of hours. And in fact, if you're really stressed, it'll hang around for a lot longer than that. So you can imagine if you're experiencing things throughout the course of the day that are causing you to be stressed, and it could be more obscure things or more things that we don't think about, like not being able to pay the bills, or you're caring for someone who's sick, that is going to be constantly triggering that stress response. And that has consequences for the long term. So in the short term, it's great, but in the long term, it will actually affect the way our brain cells connect, the way our brain cells function. And in fact, it causes some brain cells to die in certain regions of the brain. And that, of course, has drastic consequences on the way we behave.
So is it maybe you just explain something to me. So there's different types of stress, I guess. There's probably good stress and bad stress. Mm-hmm. And good stress can help us build adaptations. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could, I'm talking as a layman, of course, but maybe you could sort of narrow it down. How do you define a good stress versus bad stress? I mean, what's the difference?
Well, I guess there's the emotional component. So let's say you are exercising. That's a good stress for the body, right? It's going to be releasing all of these incredible factors that improve brain function, improve blood flow. It even releases things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially like a fertilizer for the brain. So it really helps your brain to function optimally. But if you hate exercise, then you'll respond slightly differently. So if you enjoy exercise, you'll also release things like endorphins, which make you feel good. But if you don't like exercise, you won't release them, and therefore you'll have more of those negative responses as a result of that. And a really good study that kind of reflects what I'm trying to say here is they've done studies, for example, on rats, and the rats love running on a running wheel. They will just do it as much as they can. They love it. And the rats that are doing it of their own choice will have these changes in the brain. They'll have essentially positive effects on their physiology. But if you were to force a rat to run, it has the opposite effect. It's basically causing stress in a negative way. And that has consequences not just for how the rat behaves, but also for its metabolism, also for its risk of, ultimately risk of any of negative consequences. So really, it can be good and it can be bad. And the difference is really your perception of the stress.
So and that's a good thing to talk about, your perception of the stress. How do we, everyone has a different perception of themselves being stressed. Is that because of, some sort of DNA that we've inherited from our parents, or is it something we've developed as we're growing up as kids, like through a socialization of our families? Or and how do like, if I'm trying to live to as long as I possibly can, and I know that certain things stress me out, like at work, for example, there are some things that I get really aggravated by. How do I know whether they're good stresses for me or bad stress? Because, like I could just stop work, go and become a farmer or go and play golf every day. And because I see those guys, I went to school with those guys, and those guys are, friends of mine, and they look terrible, and they don't look like they're going to live longer than me. That's just my view on it at the moment. They're probably happy. I think they're happy, but I also feel as though they're not challenging themselves enough. And I see Dr. David Sinclair say things like, in terms of exercise, we should stress ourselves, exercise stress, and push ourselves to a limit, and that's the only way you get proper adaptations as we get older.
Yes.
Maybe you could sort of dig into that a little bit for me, because I find it like completely confusing. Everyone's got a different view.
Mindset matters. So we were talking about this a little bit before we went on air, and it really comes down to your perception of it. And another example that I can give of how this works. So there's a really cool study done by Dr. Crum quite a long time ago now, and her lab were basically looking at how your body responds to stress depending on what you think about stress. So they had a group of managers, and they told some of the managers about the positive effects of stress, that yes, it's there to help you reach peak performance, and your airways opening up means more oxygen is getting into your lungs, and that oxygen is going to help, your body function, and getting more blood flow to your muscles means that you're going to perform better. And having that mindset of that it's a good thing ultimately meant that they released a little bit less cortisol, or just the right amount of cortisol to allow them to do well. But for the people who were taught beforehand about the negative effects of stress, which are true, but it's also about mindset, right? They were taught about those negative things, and they responded very differently. So if you think about it, we have this sort of optimal level of cortisol in our body to function, in challenging situations. And if you have too much, you end up with anxiety, and your performance actually goes down. And if you don't have enough, then you also have poor performance. And we see this in athletes who, let's say they're playing basketball and there's a really easy shot and you know that they can do it, but there's the crowd roaring behind them and there's so much pressure.
And you need to win.
Yes. And their cortisol actually goes above the range that it's meant to be. And as a result, their performance goes down and they miss the shot. So by changing their mindset and realizing that actually, no, this is good stress, it's helping us to reach peak performance, it means that they will perform better. And in this study with managers, the ones that actually knew that stress was a performance enhancing thing, not only released the right amount of cortisol, they did better, as opposed to the ones who perceived it as being a negative thing. They performed worse and didn't have the right amount of cortisol. It was either too much or too little.
So how would one titrate that though in themselves? I mean,
knowledge is power. So once you know that actually stress can enhance your performance, that changes everything. If you don't know that, you're going to view your sweaty palms and your racing heart as a negative thing. But if you remind yourself, actually, it's there to make me be the best version of myself, then you will perform better.
Say it's a long-term stress. For example, let me just think of something. It's not just on today's transaction. It's something you're building up towards. Maybe you're trying to get your PhD publications out, and you've got 5 chapters, and you're coming up to defend your PhD. And it's been going on now for months, and you haven't had enough publications in order to get the PhD awarded. I'm trying to think of something that might be relevant to you, and this anxiety-stress goes on for months. It's there when you go to bed. It's there when you wake up in the morning. It's not just a little thing that's occurred today. Mm-hmm. I'm not just taking a goal, but it's something that's just traveling with me for months. How do you deal with that sort of thing in terms of your perception of the stress?
Right. That's where it comes into play, where you use other techniques to reduce the effects of stress on your body. So maybe you can't change your mindset so much, but you can change how you respond to that stress. And that is where you might start to use certain tools to reduce the effects of stress on your body. So exercise, for example, is it is fundamentally a stressor, but in the long term, it increases your resilience to stress. Another thing you could do is using the physiological sigh. So, this is gaining popularity.
Physiological sigh?
Physiological sigh.
Oh, you mean the breathing out?
The breathing, yeah. And kids do this all the time. If they're throwing a tantrum, they'll be like,
yeah, I know.
We do it unconsciously, but using that 2 inhales and then a long exhale, then ultimately it's the fastest way to switch off that stress response. Other things you could do include using a sauna. So saunas will also decrease your cortisol response over time as well. Yes, by up to about 20%.
Wow.
Other things.
What about the cold baths?
Cold baths. Well, cold baths are a really good stress inoculation tool. What I mean by that is when you're putting yourself in a stressful situation, but you're challenging yourself and you know that it's a safe situation, then it actually increases your resilience to future stresses. So let's say you have someone who's in the army, then a great way to build up their resilience to future stress is to put them in a stressful situation that they can control, like being in a really cold water bath, right, a cold pool or whatever it might be, and then getting them to calm down and to think and to just maybe go through processes in their head that they need to learn or deal with. And by doing that in a controlled situation, it basically prepares you to deal with future stresses. I think one of the other, and in fact I probably should have mentioned this first, one of the most powerful things that we can do, other than exercise, is socialising. So when we're socialising with people that we like, then we have a few things happening, and one of those things is the release of oxytocin. So it's even better if you hug the person or you have physical contact is better, but that has to be consensual, of course.
Yes.
But what that does is higher levels of oxytocin will have this feedback loop and it will reduce that stress hormone cortisol. So that's why hanging around people that you like, you feel better, you feel less stressed. And that's not just a coincidence. That's your body's response to that. And it's lowering those stress hormones.
How does alcohol and drugs fit into this whole story? Because, feeling a bit stressed, particularly when, if I go back 30 years ago when I was working in banking and stuff like that, feel a bit stressed. Let's go out with the boys, have a few drinks. We need a drink. And of course, I was much younger though, but I don't know whether it actually helped me deal with my stress. It meant it anaesthetised me and put me to sleep. And probably if there was drugs around in those days, I would have done it anyway as well. So how do those things work in with stress management? And also, how does that whole alcohol thing fit into the longevity game relative to stress?
Well, alcohol fundamentally is a neurotoxin. And we know now that even one...
Poison.
Poison.
For the brain.
For the brain, yeah.
Wow.
And we know that even just one drink a week is actually going to cause a bit of shrinkage in your brain.
My God.
So I think the Australian guidelines is 10 drinks
a week.
Are okay, and that, but it still has profound effects on your brain. So actually no amount of alcohol is safe, as we know now, which is worrying because it's such a part of our culture.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you talked about socialising.
Yeah.
And a lot of times socialising is around a drink.
That's right. So I guess that's why maybe, one drink can be a bit of a social lubricant, and that can have that beneficial effect in terms of it's allowing you to talk about things and it's allowing you to connect with people. So, moderation would be key. But ultimately, if you're drinking, it's going to also affect your sleep. And that's something that is already impaired when you're stressed. So one of the things that wakes you up in the morning is a surge in cortisol. So it causes us to be awake and alert, right? But if you go to bed with high levels of cortisol, it's going to be hard, number one, to get to sleep. And also you'll wake up multiple times throughout the night potentially as well. Alcohol will do the same thing. So it'll cause you to wake up multiple times and you won't be refreshed. You won't have that same refreshing sleep. So I think that's why we often lean to things like alcohol to help us de-stress, because it allows us to socialise. It also, I guess,
it allows us to forget too.
Briefly.
Yep.
But ultimately it's not an adaptive thing.
So you talked about, we'll come back a little bit more and talk about exercise and stress in a moment, but the three big factors for living a long, well, there's lots of big factors, but three of the big factors of living a long time is your sleep strategy, your nutrition strategy, and your exercise strategy. And it's not necessarily about what you're doing, it's also what you're not doing or what you shouldn't do. But let's just talk about stress and sleep. Because I know if I don't sleep enough properly, so if I have a crappy night's sleep, like I did last night, I find my ability to manage the way I feel for the day, let's call it, I hate using the word, but much more stressful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've sort of worked out how many hours is, my sweet spot. What I mean by hours is how many hours of actual sleep as opposed to how many hours I might be laying in bed, and what type of sleep I need to get, like, deep REM, blah, blah, blah. And I use a Whoop, I monitor everything. But how does, let's say I have a stressful day today, what should I be doing to sort of improve my sleep strategy for tonight?
Well, I guess you could use, for example, the Physiological Sigh to help you get to sleep in the first place.
You go for a run?
Yeah. Sorry?
Do you mean go for a run?
No, as in just use the breathing techniques to help switch off that stress response.
But it's funny, Lila, when you say that. I tried it last night, and as soon as I woke up, I started thinking about stuff that I had to get sorted. And I tried the breathing, but I couldn't do it the way I normally do it when I'm more relaxed. It's funny because I was stressed. I felt like I couldn't do it properly. It's weird. Like it was like a double bunger for me. Like I couldn't do what I normally do. And in the end, I ended up turning the television on because I needed a distraction, and I turned something really boring on television. It was some looping news. It's just the same news just kept looping over. And after I heard it 2 or 3 times, I got bored with it and I went back to sleep. But how do people deal with stress relative to their sleep? Because I know if you don't have a good sleep strategy and if your stress inures for a long time, my mother passed away from motor neuron disease when she was 86, and the reason, I don't know the reason, but no one knows the reason, but she didn't sleep ever. Like as long as I can remember, for 40 years, I don't remember my mother having a proper night's sleep, and because she was really stressed out about who knows what, I don't know. We didn't have money problems or anything like that, but she was just anxious about stuff. Could have gone back to her childhood, I guess, and I reckon that wrecked her brain somehow. Something didn't get sorted in her brain overnight when we normally would do that whilst we were asleep. Why? Can you just give me an understanding of the dynamics between stress, anxiety, and sleep strategy?
So when you haven't slept enough, let's say you've not slept at all, what happens is that your brain doesn't have a chance to reset. There's a few things that are happening. So your emotional control gets reset when you sleep, and if you don't sleep, your amygdala, the emotion part of the brain, would be about 60% more reactive. So you'll be much more emotional and labile, or more likely to cry at things or be reactive to things than you would be. So that's one thing. And I guess we've also got to consider what it's doing to your brain's ability to clean itself at night. So our brain basically has this waste removal process that's mostly active when we're sleeping. So if we're not sleeping, then that waste that would normally be building up over the course of the day. So just metabolic waste that it'll just build up in the brain, and if you don't sleep, it'll stay there. So that's
just byproducts of energy and thinking and cell byproducts.
Exactly. So, I mean, in the rest of our body, we have this thing called the lymphatic system, which will basically wick away that waste, and eventually
go to the toilet.
It'll get metabolized out. But in the brain, it sits there until it has a chance to get cleared out. And most of that is happening as we're sleeping. So by not sleeping, we're essentially setting us up for another day of even worse ability to manage our stress response to things.
Yeah, so but if let's say we go to sleep and we are a bit stressed before we go to sleep, does the stress continue on in our brain even though we're unconscious, or we think we're unconscious, we're asleep? Because sometimes I feel like I'm sleeping very light. I know I'm asleep, but I'm sort of not in a deep sleep. I'm not in that restorative sleep.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but the restorative sleep is the sleep you want me to have.
Yes.
To clear all the crap out.
Yeah, but having that high level of cortisol at bedtime ultimately means that your body is in a more alert state. So it's going to be harder to have that normal sleep architecture, going in and out of, deep sleep, REM sleep. Yeah. So you'll lose a bit of that architecture. And also when you wake up, you'll start being stressed again because you'll start thinking about the things that you were thinking of when you went to sleep. So it makes it's kind of this almost like loop of
yeah. It's sort of never ending. And because you get, for people who sort of suffer from this, and I don't, I mean, it's only very occasional happens to me these days. It used to happen to me when I was younger, but occasionally. But it's a bit of a deadly sort of loop, because the first night is the one I just described. Then if it comes back the second night, it starts to become like a habit. It's sort of like it's nearly like your body says, well, Mark, from now on, I'm going to give you this big hit of cortisol because I'm going to get you think about the shit that has been bothering you. And that big hit of cortisol, I'm going to keep giving it to you every night now because I'm now used to doing that. Is that a thing, or am I just imagining this stuff?
Well, no, it's not. Our brain really wants to work on patterns. So anything you do repeatedly, your body will essentially become entrained to doing that, whether you're aware of it or not. So if you get yourself into a loop of doing that, then it just becomes your body's baseline response. The brain's always trying to find shortcuts for things. So
efficiency, is it? Like because it wants to be efficient?
It's all about efficiency.
Yeah.
And so if there's anything that you do on a repeated basis, your body's just going to start to do that automatically.
So you've got to try and do things on a repeated basis that are good for you.
Yes. And you've got to try and break the cycle if you don't.
Yeah. So breaking the cycle is, what does that mean? Like, how do I do that?
I mean, one thing, some people like to look for supplements, for example. One thing is ashwagandha. Ashwagandha will reduce your cortisol. So that might be something that you could try having before bed to help you get to sleep. And it's not that I really like to advocate for medical interventions if you can try and do behavioural stuff, but ultimately that can be a powerful tool if you feel like you don't have control over the other things in your life. So that might be something that you might lean to. But the thing is, if you're taking ashwagandha, it's reducing your cortisol, but it also has spin-off effects on your other hormones, because cortisol gets made into your sex steroids, for example, things like testosterone and estrogens, right? So if you skew one, the other ones get skewed. So you don't want to be taking ashwagandha for long periods of time, maybe a couple of weeks, cycle it on and off. And maybe if there's a stressful time in your life, you're working towards a deadline, for example, then ultimately that is going to be might be a time where you'd really want to try and, tackle it with all the different options.
So it's interesting how the thermodynamics work. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, or is that Newton's third law or whatever, something like that. But, you're right. Obviously you're right. But when I think about it, you're right. Because you take something to assist in one thing, but it will have another response in another way. And if, for example, if your testosterone is low in a man, and I can't speak for a woman, but I know this for a man, is that it actually affects your sleep. You don't sleep as well because testosterone is an important hormone during that sleep period, and that's something I learned more recently when I was just talking to a urologist about this stuff, and he mentioned that. And it's so supplements, whilst they might give you a short-term effect, really, I think what it's sort of coming down to, Lila, is that all of us need to, whenever anybody suffers from these things, we need to have a cognitive understanding, or actually not just say, oh, this is stress, actually recognize the stress. And this sort of takes us to this mindfulness, mindfulness processes, like yoga and all those other things, meditation generally, that it's normal. It's just stress.
Yep.
And just observe it.
Yeah.
And don't let it sort of get its claws into you. And I know it's easy for me to say, but that's sort of the program that mindfulness tries to build for us.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point, is that mindfulness is also a fantastic tool for reducing stress. And in fact, it can essentially rewire the brain from the negative changes, and it can put them back into the healthier but essentially brain architecture. So when you've been stressed for a long period of time, so chronic stress is what we'd like to call it. So let's say for a couple of months consistently, then we have these changes in the brain. So for example, the memory part of the brain, the hippocampus, it starts to shrink. And so you have issues.
Serious?
Yeah, so you have issues with learning and memory. Neurons.
So could you stop there for a little? I'm going to ask you about this. So when you say it shrinks, is that because those cells that form the hippocampus, they're dying off, or what is it?
Some of them are dying.
Or we're not regenerating them? What is it?
Some of them are dying.
Wow.
Yeah, so cortisol can actually cause some of those neurons to die in the hippocampus.
Can you rebuild them back?
You can.
Okay.
Exercise, one of the best things.
Oh, really?
Yes. Exercise is really the solution to so many things.
Yeah.
And also meditation. So meditation can help reverse those changes.
Meditation?
Yeah, meditation and mindfulness.
Wow.
Also, some of the other negative changes in the brain are in the amygdala, essentially the panic center, the emotion center of the brain. So the amygdala will actually become bigger because it needs to respond to this ongoing stress, right? So it becomes a little bit bigger, and you become more emotional, more reactive. So
hypersensitive.
Yeah, hypersensitive, and that's really, when someone's been experiencing stress for a long period of time, they might seem like they've changed. They might seem like they've become this angry, irrational version of themselves, but it's not their fault. We need to remind ourselves that it's just their brain trying to adapt to this difficult situation. It's not that they've become a bad person. It's just that their brain is trying to adapt.
Well, that's interesting. It's adaptations, because that's what our body does. Like exercise, it helps us build out adaptations. Good stresses help us build good adaptations. But what you're saying is bad stresses will also build up, let's call it bad adaptations in the amygdala. So the amygdala, which is not very big actually, is it? The amygdala is the Greek word for it's the Greek word for
I feel like I should know this.
One of those nuts. It's almond.
Yes, almond. That's
It's a great, and so is it just shaped like an almond, or it's small, it's small like an almond?
It's shaped like an almond.
It's bigger than an almond.
A bit smaller.
Bit small. Wow.
Well, it depends on the individual.
But the hippocampus can reduce, which is where the memory is, and then the amygdala can increase.
Yeah. And then the prefrontal cortex is front part of the brain that's involved in everything that makes us who we are.
That's our manager.
Yeah, our personality, our attention, our decision-making skills. That becomes increasingly disconnected, and it also thins a bit as well. So that's why we have a hard time making decisions. It's why our attention span drops. It's why we become more selfish, because we can't see other people's perspectives as clearly. So when you've been chronically stressed, it makes sense that you have bad memory, that you don't perform as well at work or wherever you are. Your aggression might increase, and it's just a natural response. But as we were talking about meditation and mindfulness a moment ago, that can reverse those changes. So a study showed that essentially 13 minutes a day over 8 weeks can make that prefrontal cortex a bit thicker and make that amygdala reduce in size.
So what are we talking about though in terms of meditation? So that's a word. It means lots of things to lots of people, I guess. What do you mean? Like, do you mean singing Om, or what are we talking about? What are we talking about here?
Well, meditation and mindfulness takes lots of different forms, but I guess we can think of it as a way of focusing on yourself, your internal state. You might be focusing on different body parts. You might be focusing on your breathing. You're just focusing on what you're feeling inside you.
At the time.
At the time. It might be feeling the texture of the clothes on your skin, just taking yourself through that process of actively observing your internal state.
So it doesn't necessarily mean, therefore, if I can interpret that as being like at a particular time of day, 3 o'clock every afternoon, that I'm going to sit down and spend 15 or 13 minutes or something greater than that doing this mindfulness or meditation. But could it all, is that one interpretation, or could it also mean that, you know what, in the morning when I sit and have my cup of coffee, I'm actually going to spend some time tasting it, smelling it, feeling it, as opposed to just throwing it down because I need the caffeine?
I mean, so the studies haven't been on that way of mindfulness or meditation, but we could think of it as the same thing. You're focusing on something in the moment that is not the problem. You're thinking about enjoying that coffee. I think that's a great example of how we can implement it in our daily lives without being too overly prescriptive about things.
Because it's funny, when my dad was the most chill person in the world, and when he used to eat food, and my sons all, we all laugh at this still today because he passed away, but we used to think about this because he lived a lot longer than my mum and dad. My dad was late 90. And when he ate food, because he's a migrant and he didn't have a lot of food when he was a kid, but when he ate food, he used to really think about it and taste it, and he used to actually pull a face about how beautiful something tasted. He could actually, and I ended up producing a whiskey business because I used to love the way my dad used to put a bit of whiskey in his mouth, and he wouldn't drink much. He'd just have one nip, but that one nip was everything. It was like a complete thing for him. He didn't know how to articulate it, but I know he could smell it. I know he could taste it. I know he could get the aftertaste. And I used to wonder why my dad was such a chilled out, cool dude. And I often wonder whether it was because he had this practice, great gratitude, unbelievably happy that he just had the opportunity to do this because he didn't have when he was a kid. And but it was a practice all the time.
Yeah.
In the morning, have a cup of tea, and he would have a biscuit or whatever he's having with it, and you would see him just tasting the sandwich or the biscuit or whatever it was. Whereas me, and my sons, I have 4 sons, we're always in a hurry to get to the next thing, so we're throwing everything down in a second and trying to get to the next event. And I guess that's a form of mindfulness in some respects.
It is. And there's a few things at play there. There's gratitude, there's mindfulness, and there's also this sense of time affluence. So he was sitting there enjoying the moment, not worrying about rushing off to the next thing. And I think in today's society, we are so busy. We're running from one thing to the next, and we feel like we have no control over our own time. And not having control over our own time is a stressor. So trying to build in those moments of mindfulness or just enjoying time without thinking about what you need to do next has a powerful effect on how our body responds.
You're one of the superstars of STEM, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes. And that's a great accolade to be one of those people, to be selected to be one of the superstars of STEM.
Thank you.
And STEM being, for the audience, is that science, technology, engineering, and maths. Wow. and in that process, you're one of the members. I think it was 20, 30 members or something. I can't remember how many there is, but
50 every 2 years.
50 every 2 years, okay. And you all come from different disciplines, but you would be well aware, as everyone in that discipline would be, is this whole new push towards us living better, longer, probably through health technology, but probably more importantly, better, or optimization. As a neuroscientist, one of the things that can kill us is brain disease, of course. What are the things we should be trying to do to make sure we don't, let's leave all those other diseases out, which is not your area of expertise, but let's look at the brain. What are some of the things that you think we should be doing in order to optimize our ability to take advantage of this new thing called longevity, especially around things like brain diseases, those things? In other words, how do we, the 4 big killers, metabolic disease, in this order, actually, in this actual order, is heart, which is cardiac arrest, heart attack, cancer of any type, where it could be skin or wherever it is, brain diseases like motor neuron disease, Parkinson's, all those other things, dementia, Alzheimer's, and all the other things that go with it. There's many of them. And then finally, I already said metabolic disease. They're the four. But of those four, one of the ones that's really important is, from your point of view, and why I'd like to interview you, is brain diseases. Mm-hmm. It is the third biggest killer on the planet. What do you think of in relation to how do I preserve my brain?
Our body has all the solutions. We just need to know how to treat it the right way. And I think a lot of the things that are affecting our brain health through age is really the fact that we've moved so far away from the way our bodies were designed to function. You know, we are a social species. We are meant to be hanging out together and socializing, having community. We are meant to be helping one another. I think it's really interesting that so many of these, religious scriptures will say, help thy neighbor, or have some sort of sentiment to that. We know that when you're doing that, you have these positive effects on your own physiology and on your brain health. It's releasing things that make your reward pathways are activated, which makes you feel better, improves your mood. Other things like, giving to people. Giving to people is also going to have that similar beneficial effect. We call it prosocial behaviours in psychology and neuroscience. So doing things for one another is a really beneficial thing for us. We also have moved so far away from acknowledging one another when you walk down the street for example, here in Sydney, people don't make eye contact.
No, Sydney's terrible.
But we should. Saying hi makes a tangible difference on our sense of community. And when we feel connected to one another, then our brain health improves and our mood improves.
Do you think we're moving away from that as a society?
Yeah, we look at our phones all the time. Everything is like in a digital platform.
But is there any benefit in that? For example, like no benefit in us connecting with community in a digital sense? I mean, is that actual proper connection, or is it more, like you said before, like it's more about touch, or being close to touch? Because what's on here doesn't sort of get me, but like some kids live off these things.
Yeah, look, if you think about social connection with people face to face, and we think of that as like being a full, delicious meal, then talking to someone online is like having a lolly.
A Mars bar.
Yeah, and it doesn't have that same suite of effects on our brain. When you're hanging out with people, your brains actually start to synchronize. I used to think that was the wildest thing, but now we know that our brains actually synchronize.
With each other?
With each other. And that's why you have this incredible experience when you're like at a concert with lots of people. There's something that is happening that is connecting and putting our brains in synchrony that.
That's very interesting. Synchrony. That's very interesting, because especially with music as well. If it's music, because music sort of, I don't know what happens, especially if it's classical music, in my case at least, music sort of builds a rhythm in my brain.
Yes.
My brain seems to fall into the musical rhythm as well.
Yeah.
I can feel the notes.
Yeah. Music has incredibly powerful effects on the brain. In fact, if you look at people with dementia, so dementia being a neurodegenerative, caused by neurodegenerative diseases, and ultimately parts of your brain start dying. And over time, people will lose the ability to talk and to swallow, just to function as.
I saw it happen. I saw my mother. She had ALS.
And if you listen to music from your past, so let's say there's a person with dementia that really liked a certain song in their childhood, if you play that music to them, they have this transient ability to reactivate these networks in the brain, and they might even be able to stand up or start talking or, communicate when just 2 minutes previously they couldn't do any of those things.
It's funny, I went to, just thinking of that, Lila, sorry to interrupt you, but I went to a concert. There's a kid I know who's mildly autistic and but very bright and high functioning, and I asked him what he would like for his birthday, and he asked me if I could take him to this interpretation of Vivaldi at the Opera House, but it was a violin. The guy was a violinist who had an interpretation of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and I took him to it. And he was quite young, he'd been 12 or something. But during the concert, he sat down. Well, obviously sitting there, but he put his head down like where his knees were, and I said to him, "Mate, sit up." No. So I just let him stay there. He pretty much stayed in that position for most of the concert. And at the end of it, he sat up and it was all over and everybody's leaving. And I said to him, why did you do that? I'm used to him doing unusual things. I said, why did you do that? He said, I said, you can't, you're here to listen to the music. And he said, no, I'm here to feel the music. And this kid's very bright. Like he was actually more tapped into the music, the violinist, than say I was. And I love violin; it's my favorite instrument. But by looking at it, I was looking at everything but the violinist. I was more interested in what the violinist was doing, like in a visual sense. I was listening to it, of course, but this kid only wanted to feel it, the vibration. And music is vibration, and it's quite interesting. Like it obviously got into his brain somehow, and the way he thinks is different to the way I think, because he's a neurodivergent, and clearly music, and he was very happy. He was so happy about it, and it was like he knew that that's what he wanted to do by me inviting him or paying for the tickets to get him to this event. He wanted to feel it the whole time. Now, is music, for example, something that we should be doing more of or participating more in relation to our brain health?
Yeah, I mean, music is incredibly powerful for our brains, especially learning a new instrument. So when you're learning a new instrument or learning how to play any kind of song or sing a song, you're really trying to coordinate different parts of your brain, both hemispheres in different ways. And the more you do that, the more connectivity you have between the two hemispheres. So there's this thing that connects the two hemispheres called the corpus callosum. And really the bigger your corpus callosum, potentially the more flexible you might be in being able to problem solve. So being able to do that is a very powerful thing for that reason, but also it helps build up the thing called cognitive reserve. So we can think of cognitive reserve as being a bit like, having an extra battery in the pack when in terms of your brain's ability to withstand damage over time. So as we age, after about age 40, our brain shrinks by about 5%.
No, don't say it to me. I'm just doing a calculation.
But ultimately,
mine shrunk by 150%
per decade.
Yeah.
So, but ultimately, by doing things like that, we are building up our resilience. So that way, you can actually withstand more of that shrinkage before you might notice symptoms, before you might notice that you're not thinking as clearly, for example.
So, and just often I read stuff about, various people say things, especially the more celebrated American doctors and or, scientists. And let's take, for example, Andrew Huberman, and he keeps talking about this time of day, both morning and evening, to set your circadian rhythms up. It depends which time of year it is, because it depends on where the sun is relative to the earth. I'm not going to say sunrise or sunset, because the sun never rises or sets. I mean, the earth revolves. It doesn't make sense to me. But where the sun is relative to the earth in relation to near-infrared rays that come from the sun, and as the way your eyes can receive those, and eyes being part of your nervous system, because that's one of your first senses. How important, or how much weight should we be putting in this setting your circadian rhythms and all the chemistry that follows from that relative to sunlight? And I'm not suggesting people stare at the sun, but looking towards the sun at a certain time of day. I think it's when it's at, as my memory recalls, 700 nanometers. So when the infrared rays are at 700 nanometers, which is a certain time of day, you can actually put it into AI and ask it what time of day it is at a certain time of year, and it'll tell you. But how much weight should we be putting in this sunlight therapy, call it?
I think it's very important because, as I mentioned before, our bodies are incredible pattern generators, and our circadian rhythm doesn't just set our ability to wake up and fall asleep at the right time, but every single cell in our body is entrained to these little clocks. It's got its own body clock, essentially.
It's amazing.
So by not entraining our circadian rhythm through things like light, then those other systems get a little bit out of whack. And that has consequences for how our body functions.
But the problem is, Lila, society today, and we'll finish up soon because I'm quite conscious of your time today, and I appreciate you giving us this time. The problem is in society today, in the winter, in my case, I've left home when it's dark and I get home when it's dark. When I'm in my car, I'm in my office when the sun comes up in the winter, and then I'm in my office when the sun goes down in the winter. So it's pretty hard to get that sort of stuff done. And I often wonder to myself, am I missing out on something really important that he keeps talking about? Because I have some respect for the guy, and obviously he sounds like he knows what he's talking about. To me, at least, I'm not a scientist. I'm a citizen scientist. I'm not a proper scientist. So how much do you put a lot of weight on that stuff? That sunlight.
Yes, and routine in other ways. So it's not just sunlight, but it's also when you have your meals. That also helps to entrain not just your circadian rhythms, but our homeostatic rhythms as well. Both of those two things.
You mean not have them too late before you go to bed? Is that what you're talking about?
Whatever it is, just keeping the routine.
Keeping it set. Yeah. Like your body knows to expect to get to eat this time.
This is lunchtime. This is dinner time. This is breakfast if you have breakfast. Having those things at a routine also helps to entrain that circadian rhythm.
Yeah, because I often wonder about, and maybe you just quickly explain the circadian rhythm to us, because as I understand it, when you get exposed to the sunlight at the right wavelength, your body actually releases cortisol in the morning.
Yes.
I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, the cortisol release really happens before we wake up. It's one of the things that makes us wake up in the morning. But certainly I think part of that is sustained by then seeing sunlight as well.
And so our body is obviously really sensitive to a whole lot of things, and to some extent our society, the way we live our lives these days, we've robbed ourselves of our best chances of living a longer, better life. And we expose ourselves nearly mindlessly to stresses, and we are mindless in that. What I mean by mindless, we're not actually aware of the effects these things are having on us. And I guess if you don't have a goal that I want to live to 100, or I want to live whatever beyond the average age of Australian male, when this country is 81.2 years, if we don't have a goal to start with, we've got nothing to move back from in order to work out how I should be living my life today. And in your case, relative to, for example, how do I look after my brain? And the final question I want to ask you is about learning. How important is continual learning? Because I said right at the very beginning, I got friends who have retired, and that's all they ever worked for. All they ever talked about is the day they were going to retire. And they go and play golf, which is great, and they do lots of things, activities, go on holidays, get in a caravan, go around Australia and all that sort of stuff. But it's just doing, they're not learning. Mm. And how important is it for us to continue to learn? And what is learning for us to be able to keep our brain, fit like our bodies should be?
Yeah. So it's helping to build up our cognitive reserve again. So when we're doing lots of interesting, varied things in our lives, that's really building up that reserve, that battery reserve that I was talking about. So when we're continuing to learn new things, and it doesn't have to be learning information, it could be learning a new skill. It could be learning about, the way the stock markets are moving, or it could be learning about business, whatever it is.
Or how to build a bike for your grandkid.
Exactly. So I think we need to not be prescriptive about what learning is, just that it's taking on a new skill or information in whatever way that fits into your life. But there's a real importance to continuing to do that. So whatever way we do that, we are helping to protect our brain in the long term.
And is that have a correlation to the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, our brain cells sort of die off over time? But is this part of like a regeneration process? So in other words, we're not net deficit all the time. We're maybe net okay.
Yeah. So there's a few things, I guess, to mention there. So before I mentioned exercise helps you make new brain cells. Did I actually mention that?
Yeah, you did.
I did, yes. So one of the things that helps those new brain cells integrate is learning. So it's all well and good to make new brain cells, but if you're not using them, if you're not learning new things, they just don't integrate and they die.
So you've got to connect them.
So by engaging with interesting things or new novel things, then we're actually allowing those new brain cells to integrate and therefore increase our resilience.
So would it be therefore fair to say, as I conclude on this, would it be therefore fair to say that the exercise is helping me develop more brain cells in all parts of my brain, but not all parts of my brain doing the same thing? So therefore, in terms of the connection part, that part of my brain which is responsible for helping me remember things, I should try to remember more things. I should exercise memory more often. Those parts of my brain which require maybe the prefrontal cortex, whatever it is, requires logic. Maybe I should be doing more around the logic part as well, and maybe less around the amygdala.
You're not wrong. Yep.
Is that what sort of, in a very fundamental, I know I'm being oversimplistic and not being very scientific about it, but nor is our audience. So is that sort of what you're saying in a very simple way?
Yeah, fill your life with rich and exciting and interesting things, whatever that might be. That variety, you're learning, and that is going to help ultimately improve your cognitive reserve and your ability to age well later into your later years.
And have you seen anybody who is a model for this, that you've seen older people who are, I mean, can you hold up a model? Have you seen a person who you think this woman or this man has lived a very rich life? They're not a professor of anything. They don't speak 20 languages. They don't play 5 musical instruments, but they have a nice, simple life, but nonetheless rich, like you say, and have managed to live a good, long and fruitful life. Have you seen these individuals?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of them in the media. So if you think about it, their day is spent interviewing people and learning new interesting things. And one that comes to mind is the Australian national treasure, Robin Williams. So he has been doing the ABC Science Show for 50 years now. What 50 years running that show. And his ability to remember names, for example, he's just like the ability to do that through that cognitive flexibility and his constant learning is just remarkable.
Yes, and you would say he's a fair age?
Yeah. I actually don't know his exact age. I feel like I should.
But nonetheless, he's had longevity in that one job.
Yeah.
And he's like 50 years is a long time to be doing the same gig.
And he's been open about, his battles with cancer. He had a heart attack. He died for a brief moment.
Whoa.
Yet he is, sharp as. So,
there's living proof. Living proof,
yeah.
Well, Dr. Lila, amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it. I particularly enjoy the way you've sort of pulled apart that whole stress conversation and what it does to us, and by the way, where it's also beneficial, where it can hurt us. And then I really enjoyed where you started talking about those tools we can use to actually try and dumb it down a little bit in order that we can get our sleep strategy right, etc. Because by the way, if you don't sleep properly, you won't exercise properly.
That's right, yeah.
And if you don't exercise properly, what normally happens is you eat a lot of crap.
Mm-hmm.
When you exercise properly, you tend to eat better.
Yes.
I don't know what that deal is, but you do. And then all of a sudden you've got the whole 3 going. And then finally community, that's the most important part.
So you were mentioning about the 4 leading causes of death.
Yeah.
And we actually know that the 6 leading causes of death are actually all linked to stress.
Wow.
And if we think about it, it makes a lot of sense when we think about what stress is doing to the body, chronic stress is doing to the body. So if you've been chronically stressed for a long period of time, it's not just affecting your brain, it's affecting your metabolism. Your your immune system becomes ramped up, and then it starts to fail over time as well.
Gets worn out.
Yeah, so of course there's going to be implications in your cardiovascular health and your metabolic health. And it's not surprising that it's all going to feed into these different other causes of death, mortality essentially. And there's another thing there, another lever that's important to mention, and that's our socioeconomic status, or whether we are from a marginalised community. So when you come from, I guess, a community that's disenfranchised, you feel like you're powerless, you're worthless, and you think that maybe more wealthy people are better than you, what that does is it puts you in a state of social threat. So you see everyone around you as being more important, and you don't have power over your future. And what that does is it releases 3 times more cortisol than regular stresses.
Whoa.
So social threat is much more potentially toxic than regular stress. And that has implications for all sorts of things. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's not surprising that people from marginalised communities or from lower socioeconomic communities are more likely to have metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease. They're more likely to have violence and crime because it's changing their amygdala, it's making them more reactive. It's not surprising that there might be lower educational outcomes because it's affecting their memory centre of the brain. So I think we really need to be mindful of that. It's not necessarily that wealthier or more powerful people are doing better because they're inherently better or can get better healthcare. It's actually that fundamentally their stress response is different to a more marginalised population.
Because they're not suffering from the marginalisation.
That's right.
In the first place.
Yeah. So I think we need to remember that.
Societally.
Societally, yeah. And I come from a low socioeconomic background, and I'm proud of the fact that I have come from that. But also it's really important to know that that has implications for how we respond to stress.
Do you think that background actually and giving you a knowledge about these things actually drives you to become better?
It does. It does. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And it's helped me understand why I am the way I am. And also it helps me understand and empathise with others as well. So, yeah, I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.